Howdy, my name is Ben Brown, and I work in the Department of Agriculture, Environmental, and Development Economics at The Ohio State University, and I'm a member of the OSU Farm Office team. Today, we'd like to continue our webinar series on direct support for Ohio's farmers and ranchers through the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, or CFAP for short, with specific mention in this webinar to non-specialty crops and wool. As a background to the program, CFAP comes and has ties to the larger Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or CARES Act, passed by Congress and signed into law March 27, 2020. It was on April 17, 2020 that President Trump and Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, announced that the Coronavirus Assistance Program would contain two parts: $16 billion directed to direct assistance for producers and ranchers, and $3 billion for Farmers to Families Food Box Program, which serves as a purchases and distribution program for certain commodities. USDA then released additional details on the direct assistance portion on May 19, 2020. The application period started May 26th and continues through August 28th of this year. Later on in this presentation, we'll go through examples and talk about the payment rates for each commodity, but it is worth mentioning that the payments per commodity towards producers and ranchers for the direct assistance come from two programs, and each commodity has two payment rates. The reason is that $9.5 billion of that $16 billion was allocated from the CARES Act and is intended to help offset sales and losses and increased marketing expenses associated with COVID-19. The second portion comes from the Commodity Credit Corporation to the tune of $6.5 billion. Funding will compensate producers due to ongoing market disruptions and will assist with the transition to a more orderly marketing system as the pandemic wanes. These two together add up to that $16 billion in support for farmers and ranchers. For farmers that participate in this program, you likely won't see a difference. It just mainly relates to the accounting, but it also describes why there's two payment rates associated with each commodity. Another way to think about this is to look at the corn futures market for the month of December. Now, the program used the May futures contract to help calculate and identify the payment rates, but for this example, I'm using December, and as you can see, the black circle that's represented by the CARES funding is related to that decline in price from the beginning of the year through the middle of April. The red circle represents the CCC funding, or that Commodity Credit Corporation funding, and the sustained low prices that we're witnessing currently. So that's a way to think about why there's two payment rates and how the funding for these programs are going to work. A couple of key details for producers: the eligible producers who have an ownership risk as of January 15th of eligible commodities include non-specialty crops, livestock, wool, dairy, or specialty crops who suffered a 5% or greater national price loss as a result of COVID-19. We have individual webinars for each of these product categories, but again, remember, this webinar is just related to non-specialty crops and wool. Payments will be split into two parts. 80% of the total payment will be paid upon approval of the application, with 20% being held to a later date if sufficient funds remain. FSA has mentioned that they expect funds to remain and that producers can expect their total payment, but just to be on the safe side, to take into account how the participation rate of producers and the eligible commodities, 20% is being held back just to be safe. There is payment limitations associated with this program. These payment limitations in some cases are different than previous USDA programs or that producers might be familiar with. There is a limit of $250,000 per individual. However, corporate entities can qualify for up to 3 individuals per entity. So if you have an entity that has 2 individuals, a partnership, that entity would be eligible for up to $500,000 worth of payments. If that entity contains 3 individuals that work at least 400 hours of active work throughout the year, that entity would be eligible for $750,000. There is still the adjusted gross income limitation of below $900,000, and that is calculated over 3 tax years of 2016, 2017, and 2018. However, a producer can be exempt from that limitation if 75% of his or her income comes from farming, ranching, or forestry-related activities. And then finally, producers must comply with the highly erodible land and wetland conservation provisions like other USDA programs. Commodities had to witness a 5% price decline between 2 key dates, and this was how they calculated whether commodities had been affected by COVID-19 disruptions. The 2 dates were the week of January 13th through the 17th, an average of futures prices or cash prices over those 4 to 5 days. And then the second time period, or the ending bookmark of April 6th through the 9th, keep in mind that April 10th was a recognized holiday and the market was closed. The maize futures contracts were used, and if those weren't available, cash prices were used. Almost all of Ohio's commodities witnessed at least a 5% decline over that period, except for winter wheat, feed barley, forage crops, and alfalfa. Organic grains received the same payment rates as their commercial counterparts. And I've just got several of our Ohio crops listed. Specialty crops are not included on here. However, we do have those available if anybody would like to see them. Now, getting to the formula for non-specialty crops and wool. This formula relates just to this division. Livestock, dairy, and specialty crops have their own calculation, but the calculation starts in 2 parts. Part 1 is the lesser of either 50% of your 2019 production or unpriced inventory on hand as of January 15, 2020. Whichever one of those is the least would then be multiplied by 50% and then multiplied by that CARES per unit payment rate that I mentioned earlier. The second part of this calculation is the lesser of either 50% of your 2019 production or unpriced inventory as of January 15, 2020 multiplied by 50%, and then the CCC per unit payment rate. Now you'll notice that the inventory or half of the 2019 production is the same in both cases, and so we can actually simplify this calculation, and I'll show you that when we get to the payment rates. A couple of clarifications that arise is that eligible inventory, again, is either it's self-certified based on unpriced inventory or vested ownership as of January 15th or half of your 2019 production. Corn chalk for silage does count towards both your 2019 production and corn on hand as of January 15th if you still have ownership in that silage. To make that conversion, it's the number of tons that you have on hand as of January 15th or produced in 2019 times a conversion rate of 7.94, and that equals the amount of bushels that you can then add to your corn inventory or towards your 2019 corn production. The second condition is it has to be unpriced, and that is defined as any production that is not subject to an agreed upon price in the future through a forward contract or similar agreement or binding document. And then condition 3 is subject to price risk and must still have price risk fluctuations after January 15, 2020 to be eligible. USDA has provided some clarity on eligible contracts and non-eligible contracts for CFAP funding. Several of the questions that we have been getting related to, are basis contracts eligible? Yes, basis contracts are eligible. Hedge to arrive contracts are not. Hedge to arrive contracts are where you set a futures price, but you leave basis to fluctuate. Hedge to arrives are not eligible. Basis contracts, again, are eligible. Delayed or deferred price contracts, or DP, like several producers call them, are eligible even though that ownership has been transferred to the elevator. They are still eligible to participate in CFAP funding. But as you can see, there are several other contracts, including the forward contract and the futures price fixed contract, or the futures contract, or just a simple cash contract. They're ineligible for CFAP funding. So let's get to the payment rates. And so I've got our commodities listed in that first column. As we look through this chart, there are 3 payment rates listed for each commodity. Again, that first payment rate, the CARES Act payment rate, and I'm just going to stick with malting barley there at the top at 34 cents per unit. That again relates to those CARES dollars that came from the CARES Act passed in March. The second column there is the CC payment rate, or $37 or 37 cents per unit. And again, that's coming from the Commodity Credit Corporation. You do not have to pick between the two. As we mentioned in that 2-part formula, it is using both of these payment rates times eligible inventory. And since on non-specialty crops and wool, that inventory is the same, we can actually take an average of these 2 values and multiply it by 100% of eligible bushels. So we'll walk through an example. As a scenario here, the producer has 40,000 bushels of unpriced corn on hand as of January 15, 2020. Again, unpriced means that he has not negotiated any hedge to arrive contract or forward contract, but could have basis locked in, and that represents 40% of his or her 2019 production. So given that this is 40% of the 2019 production, half of our 2019 production would be 50,000 bushels. That's on the corn side. We do not have silage in this case. 18,000 bushels of unpriced soybeans on hand as of January 15th, and that represents 90% of the 2019 production. As a reminder, our formula is 50% of either the lesser of half of our 2019 production or inventory on hand as of January 15th times both payment rates, or again, that simplified formula is 100% of our eligible bushels times the lesser of our half of our 2019 production or inventory on hand as of January 15th times those average payment rates, or that third column that I showed you on the previous slide. So if we put this together, let's start with corn. Half of our 2019 production was 50,000 bushels. Our January 15th inventory was 40,000 bushels, so the lesser of the two is that 40,000 bushels, so we're not going to worry about 50% of our 2019 production. We're going to take it times that average payment rate, and since it's the average, we can take it times 100% of those 40,000 bushels, and that gets us to a total of $13,400 for corn. On soybeans, 50% of our 2019 production is 10,000 bushels. Keep in mind, 100% of our 2019 production was 20,000 bushels. We had 18,000 bushels of unpriced inventory on hand as of January 15th. The lesser of those two is at 10,000 bushels, which is half of our 2019 production. We're going to take that times that average payment rate, 47.5 cents per bushels, to get a total soybean payment of $4,750. Our total payment is $18,150, but it's going to be split up again in two installments, 80% or $14,520 paid upon approval, application approval, and then $3,630 paid at a later time if sufficient funds remain. What will you need in order to be prepared? Well, not only will you have to submit the CFAP application, which I'll show you here in just a few seconds, but there are a list of other applications that you will have to submit, and I've listed those here. These are all available online at farmers.gov/CFAP. Most existing customers, if you participated in a government program before, will have all of these forms on file at the USDA office already. However, if you are new to FSA programs or USDA programs, you will need to fill those out. As a reminder, that CFAP application for non-specialty crops is Part D only. So if you're only filling out for non-specialty crops, have no livestock or specialty crops or dairy, you do not need to fill out the other parts, but you will need to sign the back and then send that into your USDA Service Center. USDA has put together an online calculator that allows you to plug in your information and then press print, and it prints out the form for you to sign and then to mail in, fax, or email. Producers will need sales inventory and other records to complete the CFAP application. It is self-certification. However, we do recommend that producers retain and keep their documents for 3 years. You are not to submit those documents with your application as a reminder, but it would be good for audits and spot checks at a later date if you are selected to have your documentation on hand to prove your eligibility and your certificate. OSU also has some resources available. I've got our contact information listed for members of the Farm Office team. We do a Farm Office Live every 2 weeks, Thursday mornings at 9 a.m. We cover not only CFAP funding, but information related to the Paycheck Protection Program, the WIP Plus program, economic injury disaster loans, all programs geared to help farmers and ranchers as they navigate the coronavirus. And we also have a nice bulletin written out related to the information I've shared during this webinar for the CFAP funds and examples as well. And so just as a recap, the program started May 26, 2020. It ends August 28, 2020. There's no rush to get to the office. There are expected to be funds remaining. However, just a warning that 20% will be held back for a later time to ensure that those funds remain available for everybody. You are to apply at your local USDA Service Center. However, if you are not used to working with FSA offices, you can apply at any FSA Service Center, and those can be found online at farmers.gov/CFAP. Applications can be filled out online, download, signed, and then either submitted by mail, fax, or electronic means. Because the offices are not currently open for walk-in appointments, please call your local FSA office before mailing in the application so they can make sure that you have all documentation completed as needed. Again, you do not need to submit any records with the application, just the application, but we encourage you to keep those documents on hand. And then once you have signed and submitted your application, you'll have 60 days after submitting that application to get all the other related forms that I mentioned on a previous slide completed. And then USDA has a bunch of tools and resources, including applications, first-time participant videos, frequently asked questions, and CFAP calculators available at farmers.gov/CFAP. And as just a thank you for watching, you can receive other news and updates from the OSU Farm Office at farmoffice.osu.edu/blog. And just a reminder that we have 2 Farm Office Lives coming up at 9 a.m. on June 11th and 25th. Thanks for participating today, and hope to see you around the state of Ohio soon.